Everybody knows the media is bad for society. Watching sex and drug use on TV makes teenagers become sexually active and drug abusers. Seeing images of skinny people in magazines leads us to become anorexic, and seeing junk food on TV causes us to become fat. Or does it? These debates are very topical amongst the media and scientific community, with various experts in both fields believing that these are myths, formulated by society through inconclusive research to attempt to provide easy solutions to complex problems. By analysing accurate research and determining the reasons why such myths exist, I intend to debunk the most controversial myth of them all, that video games are bad for society, specifically because they cause people to commit violent acts themselves. It is a common but misled belief that video games are antisocial, addictive, and that they all possess violent content. Research conducted by Jay Brand in Digital Australia 2010 illustrates that 70% of gamers enjoy playing games with others, proving that gaming presents opportunities for competition, collaboration, and social interaction. Gaming is not addictive, as Brand concludes that only 3% of gamers play for more than 5 hours in one sitting, and the most popular game type amongst Australians are puzzles. Brand's research therefore determines that video games are not antisocial, addictive, or violent. These smaller myths propagate the dominant perspective that video games cause people to commit violent acts. Christopher Ferguson, psychologist and researcher in this area, states in The Drum that it is not true that research has been accumulating regarding harmful effects of video games. He says that during the era in which video games soared in popularity and violent content, youth violence and violent crimes have plummeted in most industrialized countries to 40-year lows. Australia has seen decreases in homicide and armed robberies. In Ferguson's research paper titled Video Games and Youth Violence: A Prospective Analysis in Adolescence, he concludes that video game violent exposure was not a prospective predictor of serious acts of youth aggression or violence, and there is no evidence to support a long-term relationship between video game violent use and subsequent aggression. Mental health problems such as depression are a strong predictor of serious aggression and violence. But then why does this myth still exist? It is upheld by the effects model, inconsistent research, and the fear of a changing society. According to Harrington's second lecture, the silver bullet and hypodermic needle concepts suggest that people's logic of media influence is anchored firmly in the cause and effect model. Glenn Sparks, in the book A Brief History of Media Effects Research, defines this model that once a message reaches the audience, it will exert powerful, relatively uniform effects on everyone who possesses it. In other words, the media is so powerful that when people see violence on television or on their computers, their behavioral and physical reaction mirrors this. However, the reality is people don't react in just these ways. They respond differently to media, whether culturally or creatively, therefore they behave accordingly. The research methods used by scientists who claim they have data to prove that video game causes violence has been deemed questionable. Ellen Wook highlights various inconsistencies of previous studies in her article in Young Consumers: Insight and Ideas for Responsible Marketers Journal. Studies have only examined short-term consequences, and their results indicate correlation, not causal. And as Harrington points out in the Week 3 lecture, there can be correlation between two factors that are not causally linked. Harrington stresses in Week 2 that these studies are very selective when choosing their target audience. While there are investigations into the negative effects of pop culture, new media, and video games, it is very rarely that scientists scrutinize the Bible or Shakespeare, both very violent texts. It is this unjustified and inconclusive research that contributes to the moral panic phenomenon associated with video games. The unproved research has been blown out of proportion by those who fear video games as they threaten existing social norms. These fears are hyperbolic, not real-life moral dilemmas, as Ferguson concludes that kids these days are the least violent, least likely to use drugs, the most civil, and the most likely to graduate from secondary education than previous generations. Ferguson explains that every new media experiences cycles of moral panic that are blamed for all manners of social ill. In the 19th century, dime novels were considered harmful for young women as it was believed that they could not distinguish reality from fiction, just like gamers are labelled as unable to distinguish shooting someone in a game to shooting someone in real life. Comic books have also been targeted, as well as the Gutenberg Bible and Big Brother. With all these new media examples, it was the people who did not watch or try these texts that were the most likely to believe in the myths that surrounded them, indicating ignorance breeds fear. Education is therefore the best way to convince society that these media myths are untrue, so they can distinguish actual from imagined threats.